Maybe if he could just not put his feet towards the altar. Maybe if he could just not point his feet towards the altar. I was talking to somebody a couple days ago, and they were trying to convince me that they weren't angry about something, but that they don't forgive it. It wasn't related to me. It was related to another situation I was uninvolved in. But we were talking about it, and they were saying, I'm not angry, but I don't forgive them. I'm not angry, but I don't forgive them. Does that make sense? Think about it for a minute. Serious question. I don't think it's a simple question. I think it's a kind of a deep question. I'm not angry, but I don't forgive them. What do you think, Avadut? Is that possible?
I think I deal with the same thing. Just don't know how to keep going with it.
Okay, so you got situations you can't forgive, but you're not particularly angry about them, right? All right, so you can relate to it. It makes sense to you. All right, it makes sense to you too. All right. Got two people it makes sense to. Ross, you were shaking your head vehemently. So you don't agree with Avadut and this lady. Okay, you can't mumble at me, that's not gonna work. Okay, you gotta tell me why you don't agree.
I think that forgiveness is not the same as bringing the person back into your life. I think that when you forgive someone, you let go of the anger, and I think that's almost like by definition part of forgiveness. And
So you think that forgiving necessarily includes giving up anger.
yeah, and again, that doesn't mean you're
Therefore, if you don't forgive somebody, you're still angry at them.
correct.
That's the point you're trying to make, right? And you were also trying to make the point that forgiveness and reconciliation are two different things. The point you were trying to make. You don't have to necessarily invite the person back into your life, but you do have to give up your anger. A lot of people might think, well, I can't forgive them because then they'll abuse me again. And so you want to make the point that, no, that's reconciliation, which is different than forgiveness. But giving up anger is, according to you, synonymous with, equivalent to, the same as forgiveness. Therefore, if you say, I'm not angry, it means you've forgiven the person. And if you say, I haven't forgiven them, it means you're angry. And therefore to say, I'm not angry, but I don't forgive, is a contradiction in terms. Like you're going to say, I'm in the house, I'm not in the house. You're contradicting yourself. Right? Because what is forgiveness, according to you, but the giving up of anger? More thoughts? So we got two differing opinions. That's a good indication we got a reasonably deep discussion. Got two strong, different opinions. Yeah.
I think you can let go of the anger, but you can still hold the other negative emotions, like distrust or things such as that. So you can not have anger, but not have forgiveness.
Well, then you'd be defining forgiveness as trusting the person again.
Being
And
able to
so-
let go of that situation.
And so he attempted to preemptively respond to what you just said. He said, that's reconciliation. It's a reestablishment of trust. for instance, could you say there's a serial killer who is a sociopath, or what's now known as ASPD, antisocial personality disorder. And they're a serial killer, right? Okay. Could you? And they're in prison. They got arrested. They're in prison. Could you say, I forgive them for killing my relative or for trying to kill me, but I think they should be locked up for the rest of their life because I don't want to ever see them on the street and I don't trust them and I'm deathly afraid of ever seeing them, and therefore I can never trust that they won't do the same thing again. So they should stay locked up forever, but I personally forgive them. I'm just scared and I don't want them to be released. Would that be a reasonable statement? It would be. Therefore, you can fully forgive somebody and not trust them. And so your statement that forgiveness is reestablishing trust doesn't make sense, because you could forgive somebody and not trust them. And in fact, we have a word in English for when you trust someone again. It's called reconciliation. The reestablishment of, and he anticipated this doubt, so which is why he included it kind of like as an extra thing in his statement. He was thinking somebody might make this argument. And what we're left with is, what is anger? What is forgiveness? If it's not the lessening of anger, or more appropriately, resentment. Resentment is anger at perceived mistreatment. So I perceive you mistreated me, and I feel a particular type of anger, which is based on you having mistreated me. That's called resentment. And so what is forgiveness? Is forgiveness, as Ross says, the letting go of resentment? If it is, then it would not be possible to not be angry, but forgive. Maybe it is something else besides the lessening of resentment, but it's definitely not the reestablishing of trust, because with the little thought experiment we just did, we can conceive of a situation where you forgive somebody, but you don't trust them anymore. And so, and good thinking on your part, Ross, because you anticipated what a standard objection would be, and you wove that into your answer. You can't mumble it. I don't understand. Why are you mumbling it?
I remember learning this from you, so I'm just, at least.
I mean, whatever. You get credit for getting it right. So good job. Moderate.
Well, I was thinking of it.
By the way, this is an important topic. Why is this an important topic, Mudden?
It's something that everybody deals with in every relationship.
Because it's somebody that everybody deals with hundreds of times in the course of their life. If you're not interested in this discussion, there's something wrong with you. It's indicative of a serious lack of growth. People are like, this is a boring conversation. Like, you're like an infant. If you're an adult, this is an important conversation, because you already had scores or hundreds of situations where you felt resentment, struggled to forgive, struggled to reestablish trust. And if we can figure out what these terms mean and we can navigate them, it would be incredibly valuable. And the terms are not obvious. And the reason they're not obvious is we got a bunch of smart people in the room and they're pretty much fully disagreeing with each other, like across the board. Like everybody's saying something different than everybody else. I'm not angry, but I can't forgive. No, forgiveness is exactly the lessening of your anger. No, it's the reestablishment of trust. Like, we're like all over the place. You've been in situations in your life where you finish that sentence again?
Feel I've forgiven someone.
You feel that you have forgiven somebody.
Right, but I
Got it.
still feel angry, but it's not like,
So then what is that? What is forgiveness? So for you, you're like Avadut. What's your name again? Yvette. Yvette and Avadut are both of the opinion that you can forgive, or at least they were at the beginning of class. We don't know where they're going to be now. They might be changing their opinions. We don't know. But at least at the beginning of class, Yvette and Avadut were of the opinion that you can forgive and still be angry. So then the question becomes, what is it to forgive them? We got to define it. Is it the reestablishment of trust? We tried that one, didn't fit, so that can't be what it is. So it's something else. So Madhuri is going to finish her thought, but she's been in situations where she feels like she's forgiven somebody, but she's still angry at them. Go ahead. I got you, but we're going to let her finish her thought first, because I interrupted her.
but I also agree with Ross that when you cannot forgive someone, it indicates there's anger there. So, I think that, sorry,
You fully equivocated and contradicted yourself,
right,
which is cool, but you got to give you a little better than that. You can't be like, I agree with them and I agree with him, and then give me nothing. You got to sew it together somehow, or give me something.
so I think that, if you can't forgive someone, it's indicative that anger's there, but I don't think that anger is contingent on not forgiving someone.
Okay, so what you're saying then is that forgiveness is something different than giving up anger. So you're agreeing with them and you're disagreeing with Ross. And you're simply making the point that, and the evidence for that is that you have forgiven people, or you feel like you've forgiven people, but you're still angry. Therefore, if you are angry, I guess it's like a modus tollens type situation. If I am angry, I may or may not have forgiven the person, right? And therefore, forgiveness and anger are different from one another, right? So then we got to ask ourselves, and by the way, modus tollens, not to get into a whole. If it rains, I see you too. I'll get to you after I get to her. If it rains, then my car will be wet. If it rains and my car's parked on the street, my car will be wet. But if my car's wet, it doesn't necessarily indicate that it's rained. And that's because somebody could pour a bucket of water on my car, I could have just washed my car, or somebody could have splashed through a puddle and gotten water on my car. There's just a bunch of, somebody could have thrown a water balloon at my car. There's a gazillion different scenarios where water could have gotten on my car that didn't involve rain. So if there's no water on my car, then we can be sure that it didn't rain. However, if there is water on my car, it could indicate rain or no rain. I can prove the negative, but I can't prove the positive. And people make this logical fallacy. They assume that because you can prove the negative, you can prove the positive, but you can't. It would have to be, my car can only get wet if it rains. Then if my car is wet, I know it rained. But if rain is only one of many things that could get my car wet, then the presence of rain does not necessarily indicate, the presence of my car being wet does not necessarily indicate that it rained. Did you guys follow that? Okay. Madhuri is using that logic. And she's saying, if you don't forgive, anger will be there. But there's other types of anger besides the anger of not forgiving, and therefore you could forgive, and there could be other types of anger there. So if you haven't forgiven, guaranteed there will be anger there. But if you have forgiven, there could be or could not be anger because there's other reasons to be angry with somebody besides not forgiving them. That's the argument you're making. And it's an interesting argument. Okay, I got 1, 2, and 3.
I was gonna say, like, when I've forgiven people, I don't feel like I'm carrying them as someone to be held accountable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that would be called excusing somebody.
Yeah.
When you don't hold them accountable because they are not developed enough to be held accountable, you call it excusing. When you don't hold someone accountable because they actually did nothing wrong, that's called condoning. When you are legally empowered to remove the penalty someone's going to receive for their wrong act, that's called pardoning. When you reestablish trust with somebody, that's called reconciliation. And so we have a rich vocabulary. When you don't remember what they did wrong, that's called forgetting. We have a rich vocabulary of terms which describe the scenarios we find ourselves in. And what we want to hone in on is what precisely is forgiveness. And so you mentioned excusing, which oftentimes does get confused with forgiveness, but it's actually a different word. And because you brought that up, she brought up reconciliation, you brought up excusing, it gave me a chance to come up with a half a dozen words that are all in this family of terms that all have really precise meanings in a serious discussion on this topic. Yes?
Forgiveness to me is you create a reason. Then you can
You create,
create yourself reason.
what's the word she said? Reason, okay.
Then, if you cannot make a reason, then you have to let it go. But it's painful, it takes time. But to me, I think there are two things you can do. It's a reason, let it go.
What was the last one?
Let it go. If there's a reason, you can let it go. If there's not,
That's not what she said. Don't try to help her. Just tell me the word she said. So you can reason it through, you can figure it out, and if you can't figure it out, if it doesn't make sense, then you just have to let it go.
But it's easy to say, but it doesn't have a shape.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing that. Thank you. Thank you. So she's brought up that there's a component of reason that can help to forgive, but that even without reason, you can just let stuff go. She's defining forgiveness as letting go of something. And then the question, of course, is what, Christina? Were you spacing out? Not the time to space out. It's an important discussion. The big question, she made a point that anger, her definition of anger is it's about letting it go. And the question now becomes letting what go? And you follow? We're back to that. We're back to trying to figure out how to define forgiveness. Because she's saying you have to let something go. So forgiveness is letting go of something. But then the question becomes letting go of what? Hold on. And hold on one second. And Madhuri, you get it? So you got to define what are you letting go of? What are you letting go of? And so that moves the conversation forward. I was rhetorical. Or it wasn't really rhetorical. I was looking for you guys to think about it, but I want to give Shri a chance to speak, and we'll get back to you. But we're going to move around the room a little more. Yes?
I agree entirely with Ross that forgiveness is, by definition, includes letting go of the negative emotions towards a person. If you're forgiving a person, you're letting go of those negative emotions towards that person. And I think that sometimes people might have angry feelings towards a situation and might be conflating being upset or angry at a situation with being mad at a person.
I'm not sure that it's possible to be angry at a situation. I think it's possible to be frustrated by a situation, which is a slightly different term than anger. anger, I think, has a component of blame. And if you blame someone, then you're going to blame a person. Like, people aren't angry at the law of gravity. You follow? They're not angry at the law of gravity. You might be frustrated that the law of gravity caused you to break your leg. But this anger, I think, is directed towards a party that is to blame, and that necessarily means a person.
I agree with you.
Okay? All right. All right. We're inching. We're going in a lot of different directions, but I don't think we're staying in the same spot. Okay, I see you. I do see you. I'm going to come back to you. I just don't want to be unfair and play favorites with you.
I think forgiveness is letting go of pain overall, because you can also forgive yourself. It doesn't always have to involve another person. Because, if you're angry at someone, it's usually a secondary emotion.
Can you be angry at yourself? Yes, so your argument just fell apart. I'm not saying you couldn't say anger is about giving up pain and not anger. I'm not forgiveness is about giving up pain, not anger. I'm not saying you can't say that, but the evidence you cited was that the reason why it's about pain and not anger is because you can forgive yourself and you can't be angry at yourself. So then I just simply ask you the question, can you be angry at yourself? You answer yes, and we're back to the same discussion.
Right. Yeah.
Did you follow? Stop. You can't move as fast as me, as evidenced by the fumbling you just did. So I've just given you a piece of information. I need you to digest it and then respond back to me. But if you want to go tit for tat real quick with me, it's not going to work for you. You follow? Think about it for a second. I'll come back to you in a minute. Who else do we got? I see the two of you, but I don't want to... Yes, Fernanda.
Yeah, so recently I learned with you that to forgive, or you can know you forgave somebody when you're able to wish them well. So I'm really with Ross, because I don't think you can wish somebody well if you are angry at them.
She's defining forgiveness not merely as the letting go of resentment towards somebody, but additionally she's defining forgiveness as the positive emotion of being able to wish well upon the person. And she's defining it positively instead of negatively. Of course, I do think that you would also define it both ways, giving up negative feelings and an increase of good feelings. But what she added to the discussion, because she talked about giving up something, a negative feeling, she's added to this a positive feeling of wishing well, and she's made a very sophisticated argument. It's not possible to wish somebody well if at the same time you resent them. And those things are inversely related. So as on a justice scale, when one goes up, the other one goes down. So as you wish someone well, then your resentment has to go down. It's not possible to have both go up at the same time. You can't resent somebody and wish them well. Now, I don't mean that semantically you can't make a statement. I resent you, I wish you well. Certainly you can make that statement in the English language. But the argument Fernanda's making is that statement is nonsensical if you properly understand the term forgiveness. Great addition. Good addition to the conversation. So just to recap where we're at, because we've been all around in every direction. Is it possible to forgive but still be angry? Yes. No. You have to give up one type of anger, but there could be another type of anger. Yeah, you could be angry at a situation. No, you can't. You can just be frustrated at a situation. Anger is directed towards a person. You got to let go. If you can't figure it out, then you just have to let it go. Maybe there's a reason why they did it. Then you can excuse them or condone their behavior because they did nothing wrong, or excuse them because you can understand what they were going through in the time. Maybe you can reestablish trust, maybe you can't. Those things aren't forgiveness though. Ultimately, you have to let something go. What is it you're letting go? And in addition to letting something go, you might have to wish them well, and you can't wish them well if you're holding on to resentment. And resentment is anger towards perceived mistreatment. So the specific type of anger that would be there in a situation where you weren't forgiving would be resentment. You feel someone's wronged you. And therefore you're angry at them for having wronged you. And that type of anger is called resentment. And then we had the point that the forgiveness is really about giving up pain. But we did examine that you can forgive yourself, but you can also be angry at yourself. So it could be pain, but that argument for why it's pain doesn't succeed. You follow? You want another bite from the apple?
I will try. Yeah, I totally makes sense what you're saying.
You working out?
I am.
You're looking better, man.
KD.
He's looking better. Yeah. Right? Good for you, man. Please continue.
I feel like forgiveness brings your self peace. I don't know how selfish that is, but for example,
You're not answering my question.
Okay.
You are. That's okay. That's okay. You're making the point that forgiveness is a gift you give to yourself. And that you shouldn't think that forgiving somebody is a gift to them, which we usually think it is. You're instead saying forgiveness is a gift you give to yourself, like the popular statement, resentment is taking poison and hoping the other person will die. And so you're making the point that ultimately forgiveness is a gift to you. It's helping you. You haven't answered the question, but you're adding something you think is important to discussion. I agree with you. It's important to discussion. In your estimation, anger is a gift you give to yourself, and it's the gift of, and then we have to define what it's the gift of. What are you letting go of? What are you getting? How is it benefiting you? And that'll give you the definition of anger that's been somewhat elusive thus far. Did you follow that? Good contribution. More thoughts on the subject from people who haven't spoken yet? I'll get back to you in a sec. People who haven't spoken yet? Bailey.
So I'm thinking about this kind of in relation to karma, and I guess my definition of forgiveness would be I'm not forgiving someone because I believe what they're doing to me is something that I don't deserve. And so forgiveness would be kind of accepting that I actually do deserve that in some way.
You're invoking a universal moral law of cause and effect, namely karma, which means that in your worldview, things don't happen randomly. And we don't live in such a non-deterministic world that anybody can do anything to anybody else. And although there might be some space for free will, people who want to do bad acts are matched up with people who deserve to have bad acts done to them. There's no innocence in the world. Everybody deserves what they get. The reason why children suffer sometimes is because they're old souls. And people have to ultimately get to a place where they take radical responsibility for everything that happens. And that radical responsibility then would result in forgiveness. Because you're not blaming other people. And if you're not blaming other people, you're not holding on to negative emotions towards other people. And those negative emotions that are attached to blaming somebody could be defined as, and we're left with the same question. So you brought in a moral theory of karma, moral cause and effect theory. You brought in that it's something you do for yourself, but we still haven't defined the term yet. You follow? Did you guys get that? Okay, we've been going for 30 minutes. I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in and stop playing referee. And I'm going to share some thoughts with you guys. And then we'll give you guys a chance to speak again before we finish. Anger is defined in psychology. Forgiveness is defined in psychology as the letting go of resentment. And as there's a debate whether wishing well is part of it or whether it's neutral. Some theorists argue that you have to wish the other person well in order for forgiveness to be complete. And other theorists will say forgiveness is complete when you are neutral towards the other party. I am of the opinion that you have to wish the other party well. Within the debate, and there's two camps in the debate, and I think they both have reasonable arguments, I'm of the opinion that you have to wish the other party well, and it's based on my understanding that the default position for a healthy human being is to wish well on everybody and to not be callous towards anybody. And if you're callous towards somebody, it is indicative of some subtle form of resentment or racism or bigotry or something. And that the default position for a healthy human being is to wish well on others. It's a moral and philosophical extension into this subject. That's my worldview applied to this subject then results in me thinking, if you say I don't feel anything for this person one way or the other, that is a thinly veiled resentment which is still lurking in your heart. And when Madhuri said, I feel like I forgave people, the simple response that Ross was like chomping at the bit was, yeah, you feel like you forgave them, but you actually didn't. And if you forgave them for crime A, but you're angry at them for crime B, then you still have anger, and it's just you forgave them for one thing, but you haven't forgiven them for the other thing. So when you forgive them for everything, then you won't be angry at them at all. And so your argument that you could still have anger towards them would just mean you're angry about something else, and then you have to forgive them for that. Did you follow that? Did you follow my argument?
Yeah.
Were you listening? Okay. You don't have to agree with me, but you follow what I said. And so when you say, I forgive, but I'm still angry at you, what you're really saying is, I forgive you for A, but I haven't forgiven you for B. And so your argument that there are other things you could be angry about, no, if you're angry about something, you have not forgiven the person for that thing that you're angry at them about. So it's possible to have multiple things you haven't forgiven somebody about, forgive them for A, forgive them for B, but not forgive them for C and D, for example. But it's still consistent with Ross's definition and Shree's definition and a few other people's definition and the literature's definition that forgiveness is the letting go of resentment. And resentment is the anger you feel when you perceive that someone has mistreated you. I've spoken about this elaborately in the past, and it's not what I want to talk about today, but I do think resentment has great value. If someone has betrayed you and you want to signal to them that they need to make amends, resentment is that signal. And resentment does not necessarily indicate that you are letting go of the relationship. In fact, the resentment holds on to and preserves the relationship, because it shows that you hold the person in a certain light, you expect a certain level of behavior, they've fallen short of that level of behavior, and your resentment is a cue for them to then make amends, and that's why people oftentimes will feel resentment, will not forgive, but will actually want the person to make amends and repair the relationship. And so there's this whole good side of resentment, which is designed to preserve a relationship, to demonstrate that the relationship is under threat, to demonstrate that the person has behaved in a way which is inconsistent with the integrity of your relationship, and to cue them to make amends. And that resentment is different than the bitter anger with no end in sight that we also may experience on occasion, where it's a blind resentment and bitterness that has no end game, that has no solution. It's not even looking for the other person. And it establishes a negative relationship with that person, and there's no way to turn it into a positive relationship. So I want to make a distinction between those two types of resentment. One which can then turn into a reconciliation, and the other one which is just a relationship of bitterness and anger, and that's it. And that bitterness, that anger, that resentment binds you to that person in a negative relationship. And so letting go is letting go of that pain, is letting go of that anger, is letting go of that suffering. And in that sense, forgiveness is a gift you give to yourself. Interestingly, in Sanskrit, the word for the verbal root for forgiveness, to forgive, is ksham. Ksham. It's a dual consonant. Ksham. K-sha. Ksham. And the word for forgiveness is kshama. Feminine word, which I think is interesting. You have neutral words and masculine words, and neutered words and masculine words and feminine words. Sanskrit is a gendered language, much like Spanish. And so forgiveness is a feminine word. Kshama. And it's the same as tolerance and enduring and patience. And we have this whole vocabulary of all these different words. It's also the same when you say please to someone. What you're actually saying is, please tolerate me, please forgive me. Like the same way you'll sometimes say, please forgive me, but, and it's a way of saying please. So in Sanskrit, the word for please, the word for tolerate, the word for forgive, it's all the same word. And I think there's some profundity in that. I think there's actually some depth to that. I don't think English is bad. English has all these different words which designate different, types of forgiveness and so on and so forth. I don't think it's wrong, different aspects of forgiveness. But I do think there's something quite elegant and simple, and that really gets to the heart of the issue. When you forgive somebody, you tolerate them. Upeksha is another word for forgiveness in Sanskrit, which literally means to overlook something. Upeksha, iksh is to look, and upeksha is to overlook something. So you overlook it. You let it go. Am I okay here? Do I need that? We okay? I'm going to So this idea of letting go is there in the term upeksha. It's upeksha is one of the Brahma Vihars. There's this group of virtues that show up in Buddhism, they show up in Hinduism, they show up in Jainism. They show up in the Yoga Sutras. They're kind of all over the place. They show up in the Bhagavatam. That you feel joy when you see piety or goodness, and you feel sorrow when you see impiety or suffering. And you neglect envious people. And you give mercy to sincere people, immature people, growing people. And so it's a way a spiritually minded person deals with the world. And so that neglect is upeksha. It's like a pious neglect where you overlook people's faults and you don't take them too seriously. You let stuff go. But this ksham means to endure, to tolerate. And I think that's in many ways the essence of forgiveness. You are patient, you endure, you tolerate another person's fault, and you don't harbor anger towards them. And so I think the idea of forgiveness is intimately and inexorably linked to giving up anger. And I think any definition that doesn't acknowledge that is a bad definition. And I think that every definition I've seen in literature, like in like psychology where these terms are defined, the primary definition of anger is forgiveness is the giving up of anger. So when you say, I can forgive but I'm still angry, what you really mean is, I want to forgive and I'm trying to forgive and I can't. When you say, I feel like I forgave but I'm still angry, what you really mean is, you like watched an issue of Oprah and you thought you forgave and you had a good minute and maybe you were too tired to hold on to your anger, so you let it go so you go to sleep, and you suffered enough where so you temporarily put it into abeyance, but still there. And when real forgiveness is there, anger's gone, you can in fact define anger as the giving up of, I keep messing up, so just fix it for me. Yeah, so just fix it. So I realize I'm messing it up. I hear myself, I'm probably catching half of them. You guys just fix it for me. You guys are smart, you know what I'm trying to say. You can define forgiveness as the giving up of anger, and for me, you have to wish the person well. That's me navigating through what everybody said. Here's what I want to share. And this is something I've never spoken about before. So it's, everything else I've said, I've spoken about in the past. This is something new. I think that resentment is based on delusions of grandeur. Now, you'll blow my mind if you can pick up where I'm going. I was a little cryptic. Does anybody know where I'm going? Raise your hand if you know where I'm going. You'll get like, I'm not giving out gold stars, but if I was, you'd get one. Let's hear it. Oh wait, Christina, did you put your hand up?
I'm thinking about it.
I mean, you're like, it's like what Ross does with his words. You're doing with your hand. It's like Mr. Mumble, and you're like, but I caught it. Go ahead.
So, I think that if you don't want to give energy to somebody, then you won't either forgive them or be angry. But really, that's you thinking that you're better than them.
Say that again. I had a hard time following you. You were a little mumbly too. So just yell at me and say it again. I want to hear what you have to say.
So if you want to forgive somebody, if you don't want to forgive somebody and you don't want to be angry at them just because you don't want to think about them, like you don't want to give them that power, so you think that you're better than them.
That's a really interesting point. It wasn't where I was going, but I think it's interesting. Sometimes you get that, I feel sorry for you, you pathetic. I say, I pity you. It's clearly you're angry at them and you're resentful towards them, and so you frame it. And here's what I think. I think no one really wants to admit just how resentful and petty they are. And therefore, everybody sounds like an idiot when they discuss this topic. Because the reality of defining anger and resentment very simply would reveal all of us to be petty resenters that hold on to stuff for far too long. And by being enigmatic in our definitions, where we should have a black belt in this subject, we don't take the red pill and go down the rabbit hole and do some surgery. And we live in the shadows and the gray areas. And sometimes people will speak to that. Anger is a gift you give yourself. And you just have to let it go at some point. And your statement, like you feel like you're better than the person. You get, I pity you. I'm not angry at you. I just pity you. But it's like they're seething. It's like they're seething with resentment as they make that statement. I'm not angry at you. You don't deserve that from me. I just pity you. But you can it's like palpable how much hatred and bitterness is in those words, right? And so there's some delusions of grandeur. You think you're better than the person, but actually you're totally victimized by your anger. So I think it's a great point. It wasn't what I was thinking of, but I like it nonetheless. Yes?
I was thinking you're going to bring it back around to the ASPD comment you made at the beginning of class, with more like a narcissistic or sociopath.
No. But Okay. Ishwar must know. By the way, at this point, you're trying to read my mind. I mean, I gave you something. You're trying to tell me what I'm thinking of. So it's not like we're not doing a kumbaya circle. If you get it right, I'll say yes. And if you get it wrong, then bummer. But even if I like your point, if it's not what I was thinking, then we're going to keep going. I think Ishwar's got it.
The direction I thought you were going to go was when it is a topic of gratitude, and someone who has delusions of grandeur, they feel entitled to certain things, and so that just generally that's that.
Close. Pretty close. I'm going to give you credit. And I like the haircut. You're looking good. And I'm so monitoring your haircut, vicariously enjoying, because I don't have any hair left. KD, you showed it to me, right? Did you text it to me?
No, we were together at Tree's birthday party.
That's right. Like that's what a big topic your haircut is. It's like he's breaking out photos of your Shree's birthday party, like Ishwar pre-haircut, Ishwar post-haircut. And everyone was like ooh and ah. I think that when you resent somebody, what you really want is you think that by being angry and resentful at them, you will affect their punishment. And there's this desire to see them punished for what they've done to harm you. And so resentment isn't just bitterness and anger towards perceived mistreatment. Rather, it's bitterness and anger towards perceived mistreatment coupled with a desire to see the other person suffer, to get their karma, to get their just desserts, to be punished for what they've done wrong to you. And we feel like if we let go of that resentment, somehow it lets them off the hook, as if we are this omnipotent deity that by desiring the other person's suffering, then it will create that universal situation where they'll suffer because we have desired it. And if we let go of it, then somehow or other that's equivalent to the universe like forgiving their debt. And then we have this incredible, you see what I mean when I say delusions of grandeur? And I think in every situation where there's a lack of forgiveness, which means the holding on to resentments, I think that if you dig deep enough, this is the insanity which underlies it. Let me say it again. I'm presenting the argument that in every single situation in your life, forever, from the time you were a child up until today, where you've ever not forgiven somebody, what you really are is angry at them and bitter towards them because you think they've wronged you. It's always bitter resentment, which is anger because of perceived mistreatment. That is literally the exact emotion you're experiencing. And furthermore, the subtext reason, the subtext logic that underlies that emotion, and why you have such a hard time letting go of it, is because you want to see them suffer. And you think you're a deity. And that by being angry at them and bitter towards them, that the universe will make them suffer. And if you let go of that, then they will be forgiven by the cosmos, and they will not have to suffer. I think that's what's actually going on under the surface. And like half of you are nodding your heads like a bobblehead, which means I'm not alone in this thought process. And by the way, that's the proof that what I'm saying is right. The fact that I can make such like an aggressive, definitive, absolutist statement that you guys can immediately be like, oh yeah, that's me. That's powerful evidence that this is at the heart of it. And it may be that when you see the other person suffer, you'll feel remorse. But forgiveness is letting go of that. And forgiveness is really, it's humility. Not like Krishna will take care of you. Not like that. Not like that. That's got that same seething resentment in it. It's the, I'm okay. Like, you know, you can get re-involved in my life, or you can go your own way, whatever, or you can have done something where I'm not interested in you getting re-involved, and maybe that door's closed. Those things don't require anger or resentment. But I'm not in control. I don't need to see you suffer. I don't want to see you suffer. In fact, I wish you well. I'm not the controller. I don't need to concern myself with it. I can let it go. I can tolerate it. I can endure it. I can overlook it. And these Sanskrit terms, kshama and upeksha, I think they really get to the heart. Things happen in life and you just have to just tolerate them. You just have to develop the ability to let it be water off a duck's back, or water under the bridge, or let go and let God. Or it's not all about you. You follow? And therefore I think forgiveness is on everybody's menu if they want to pursue self-realization. Full forgiveness. It's a requirement. To be bitter and resentful is to not be self-realized. To give up bitterness and resentment is a prerequisite for self-realization. It's not synonymous with self-realization, but it is a prerequisite. Healthy people tolerate, they forgive. It's not all about them. They're humble. They realize everything doesn't center around them. And they don't think that they're going to maintain someone's karmic, comeuppance by their thoughts. And I think we have to understand this topic. We have to think about, meditate on, and understand this topic. And then we have to live it. And so the big point I wanted to make was that there is this grandiosity and this delusion of grandeur and this absolute delusional sense of omnipotence that is the substratum of resentment, which is the desire to see someone suffer, and the idea that somehow that you have to meditate and hold on to that for it to happen. And man, is that toxic. And at odds with reality. It's not all about you. Don't let stuff go and move on. You can endure, you can be patient, you can tolerate, and that is synonymous with forgiveness. Those are my thoughts. Back to you guys. Yes. And by the way, this is why I spend a bunch of time telling you to forgive your ex-wife and trying to help you get over it, is because it's ultimately it's super toxic, and it may be the most easy to understand thing in the world. And sometimes you might have to have somebody dive into their resentment because they need to spend a little time. But when it starts to become a permanent, crippling situation, then we have to address it. Just like grieving is a natural process that people go through. It freezes time, allows people to work stuff out, but it becomes complicated grief, it becomes a serious, maladaptive response to trauma when it doesn't work itself out 6 months or a year. And so it may be that we have to dive into our resentment and our anger. But there has to be this end game where we forgive and we let go. And I think in many ways this is where we need to spend a ton of our time. It's like in baseball, like there's a ton of time spent with like a second baseman and the shortstop. Like a ton of action happens there. They have to be really good players there. Because a ton of action happens there. You follow? And so I'm sure there's some equivalent thing in soccer and football, whatever. But, I know baseball. But there's a ton of actions happening there. I think there's a ton of action happening here for us. And we need to spend time on this. We have to become expert at forgiveness. Expert at navigating resentment. And moving through it. And not having it be, something which goes on in perpetuity. And we have to give up the sense that we're in charge of other people's destinies. And the same way we want mercy for ourselves, and we want to be forgiven and not necessarily get our just desserts, and not have Krishna punish us for every single thing we've ever done wrong, we have to extend that same mercy to other people and just wish well on the rest of the world. The idea of like justice for you, but mercy for me, it's hypocritical. Same way we want people to see the good in us, and we want to be forgiven for our foibles and our mistakes and our errors. We have to wish that same for other people.
So you mentioned that it's your thoughts wanting them to be punished, thinking can be actions a lot too. And
Yes. Oh, I mean, obviously, this often translates into making moves on other people. I'm sorry, I should have said that. And so we've got, obviously that has to stop, where you go out and like do like a revenge killing. But, or honestly, even if you do end up doing something physical, you can physically punish someone without hate in your heart. Someone could, rape your loved one. Forgive me for speaking so grotesquely. Someone could rape your loved one, and you could go snuff that person's life out and not hate them. Just have an understanding that this is the appropriate punishment for this crime. I wish well on your soul, but this is what has to happen. There may be situations there where you're actually if that's your responsibility to physically do something about it. That may happen in life. But it doesn't have to be accompanied by this desire to see them suffer. You may be in a position in some circumstances where you are supposed to be their karmic retribution. And that's for their good. I'm talking about all the times when it's not that clear cut. And when you make a choice to just enmesh yourself with somebody else where it's not like that. And I'm just going to make this point again. It's a somewhat radical point. I have experienced in my own life. People like vandalizing the temple or trying to harm someone at the temple, and I've had to get physical with them. Or maybe even yell at them and like get physical with them and yell at them. But I'm like, in my heart, I don't have any hatred towards them. Even though I'm talking in a hateful way to them because I know that's what they need, that's what the situation requires, I don't actually feel it. It's like it's like a snake without poison in its fangs. I'm doing what is supposed to be done based on the situation and my assessment of it, but it's done without that like heat and that hatred and that bitterness And I feel bad for them that we're in a situation where I have to, get physical with them, remove them from the property, hold them down, call the cops. Does that make sense? And so we have this all the time. I mean, like self-defense. That's not murder. It's self-defense. We see a cool, calm, collected cop with the body cam on saying, drop the weapon, drop the weapon, drop the weapon, I'm going to fire. And then they fire. It's like no one's arguing for that police officer to go to prison. It's the appropriate amount of force. He's in a position where that's supposed to happen. I'm talking about all the after-the-fact stuff where all the dust has settled, but you're not satisfied and you want to see the other party suffer. Anyway, now that you mention this, I realize there's a whole gaping hole in my discussion, so thank you for bringing that up. More. You want to say more?
Well, I was going to say I really like it, and I think that it doesn't invalidate it because, at a certain point too, you say I've punished you enough, I've dropped enough bombs on your city, I've ruined enough of your days, and I'm ready to stop hitting you or hitting you back, whatever it is. So there's the megalomaniacal part, and then there's also the, I think, to a certain extent, sometimes even worse part where you're the one who's doing the punishing and you have to let that go, maybe even more so.
You're saying that by not having hatred in your heart, if you are in a position where you do have to mete out punishment, you'll be able to mete out appropriate punishment, and it won't become this endless thing where it's like never good enough, right? Yeah, good. And most of us are not in a position of being a police officer or someone who's avenging, like an avenging angel type situation. Most of us don't have that in our lives. And so for most of us, what we're going to be spending a lot of time with is these negative emotions that toxify us and rob us of quality of life and just are generally awful and unpleasant and rob you of depth and joy and meaning and purpose and make you profoundly petty and delusional. If occasionally you are in a situation where you're the tip of the spear, then yeah. But you still have to deal with all this hatred and bitterness that just ends up toxifying your life. More. Yeah.
I have a question. So how do you forgive and let go of resentment when it's a constant? Like, for example,
You don't. You just get away from that person.
you can't. It's like someone in your office.
Sure you can. You can insulate yourself from anybody.
What'd you say?
You could insulate yourself from anybody. I could see you every day of my life and have nothing to do with you. We could work together and I could decide I want to insulate myself from you and we could have very little to do with each other. You give that person no energy, you just neglect them piously with no ill will in your heart, and you just keep them in a cage, in a box, away from you. It's easy to do. Just give them zero energy. You know what I mean? I can help you more specifically with that. But don't think that just because you're proximate to someone that you necessarily have to deal with them very much. There's tons of people in your office you don't have much to do with, right?
Yeah.
So you could just be one of those people for them. Yeah, Stephen.
I was going in thinking resentment was bad, and then you flipped it like, oh, actually it's really good until like 6 months to a year, I think was the point. And I thought that was really cool. And then I was thinking, okay, but how do you get rid of resentment? What do you really uncover and say, this is...
That's what I was trying to do. I was trying to get to the heart of resentment, because if you understand the heart of it, you can start to contend with it. Yeah, you got it. That's great, man. Thank you, Stephen. More? Yes.
Yeah, I've never ever thought of this aspect of the self-indulgent aspect of resentment, where it's like you think it's healthy, but actually it gets to be all about you and actually robs the other person, unless they're a complete sociopath, like to think that they're not going to feel some sort of suffering for their choices, whether now or later, actually starts to kind of degrade.
I'm making an even more aggressive argument. I'm saying don't worry about whether they feel it or don't feel it. That's not my responsibility. If I'm not in a situation where it's my job, then I can just let it go. You learn, you don't learn, you feel bad, you don't feel bad. What does it matter? It's not my concern. I wish you well. I'll move forward in my own life. I got a couple scrapes and bruises. I've probably given out a couple scrapes and bruises to people in my time. I got a few from you. I learned my lessons. I move on. You follow? This like making yourself feel better. They'll get what's coming to them. I'm saying don't do that. You follow? You get it now? KR, you're going to say something?
Yeah, thank you for this class. Every time you talk about a topic, there's something new. And your ability to grandeur, I really appreciate. And I appreciate the aggressive, radical nature of it because it's so sobering and immediately like an attitude check. And I find it very helpful for the kind of resentment I'm still holding on to, like my mom, to release some more. And also the idea of, I always associated forgiveness with acceptance, like it's an on-off switch, I just need to make that point. But your points about endurance and patience being a big part of the process, and just have to keep working at it, was really helpful.
I also think by identifying what we're contending with, it no longer owns us. By defining everything, by seeing it for what it is, by labeling it, by marking it, it becomes much easier to navigate. When it's amorphous and it's undefined and it's not as clearly understood, it ends up like living and existing like in like the gray areas, like some kind of funky mold in your fridge. But by clearly defining what it is and what it's not, it's like it becomes really apparent. Okay, that needs to be cordoned off from everything else. Oh, that's the issue. Yeah, that's going to have to get cleaned out. And it just becomes much more navigable and much more manageable. Does that make sense? It's like these types of exercises, they're illuminating, and you don't go back to that same slumber. You kind of see the mirage for what it is, and you won't mistake it for an oasis. And it's easy to see the pitfalls, so you're just way less likely to fall off the road. Does that make sense? Let's call it there. Let's do some kirtan. Thank you so much.